Okay, before we dive into Hamlet, I do want to give you some background and context for what you guys are going to be reading. And so I hope that you will approach this text with an open mind and not go, oh, Shakespeare, it's so hard to understand. What I've done within the class itself and the course content is that you will be assigned a reading an act of the play. I'll give you a synopsis of it. I will also give you a audio version to listen to as you read. Plays are made to be spoken and ultimately performed. And so hearing dialogue helps you keep the characters straight. It helps you get into the rhythm of the iambic pentameter that Shakespeare is writing in, and I really think it will help your comprehension. So if you go read over the synopsis of the act so you'll have an understanding of what is going on, then play the audio as you are reading. I think that will help you tremendously. I've also included some clips from a performance of Hamlet. So again, that you'll be able to see certain scenes actually performed. And then of course, I'll have my lectures. So hopefully all of those tools will make this a relatively painless and hopefully interesting process for you. So I do want to give some background, and I want us to start with the synopsis of Hamlet. Before we start talking about who Queen Elizabeth was, before we start talking about context, cultural contexts, I want you to just have an overview and an understanding of what is going on in this play.
Hamlet is a play written in about 1600 by William Shakespeare and is one of the most popular and influential stories ever. Hamlet is set in Denmark at a time when Norway is about to attack and some dodgy stuff is happening in the royal castle of Elsinore. Prince Hamlet is the son of King Hamlet and Queen Gertrude. At the start of the play, King Hamlet has died and the king's brother Claudius has married Gertrude and taken over as king. Prince Hamlet is very upset by all this, moping around saying he wants to die and that everything sucks. He's especially angry that Gertrude married Claudius so soon after the king's death. So Claudius and Gertrude are concerned by Hamlet's behaviour. They try to cheer Hamlet up, and when that doesn't work, they get a couple of his old friends, Rosencrantz and Guildenstern, to spy on him, though Hamlet sees through the deception. Then a ghost appears to Prince Hamlet, claiming to be his dead father. King Hamlet's ghost says that he was murdered by Claudius with poison, and demands that Prince Hamlet avenge him by killing Claudius. Hamlet isn't entirely sure that the ghost really is his dead father, but he agrees to kill Claudius. He tells his friends Horatio and Marcellus that he will act as though he's mad to prevent drawing suspicion. Hamlet meets with Ophelia, who he has a romantic relationship with. Hamlet acts crazy and awful to her, telling her he never loved her and to get to a nunnery. Ophelia's father Polonius says he thinks Hamlet is mad with love, though earlier he was saying that Hamlet doesn't love her at all. So Hamlet has a plan to work out for sure whether Claudius killed King Hamlet. He gets a group of actors to perform a play in which a king is murdered with poison. Claudius leaves the room in the middle of the play, which Hamlet sees as proof that his uncle killed his father. Later, Hamlet comes across Claudius wrestling with his guilt in prayer. Hamlet almost kills Claudius there and then, but he decides not to, saying that Claudius might go to heaven if he's killed while praying. So then Hamlet is talking with his mother Gertrude, when he hears a noise behind a tapestry in the room. He thinks it's Claudius, so he stabs the tapestry, but out falls Polonius, who was spying on the conversation. Having killed Polonius, Hamlet berates his mother a bit more, telling her not to have sex with Claudius, until the ghost of King Hamlet pops up again and tells his son to stop mucking around and kill Claudius already. Claudius is not feeling terribly safe at this point, so he sends Hamlet with Rosencrantz and Guildenstern to England with a letter to the King of England saying to kill Hamlet. Hamlet finds the letter and changes it so it says to kill Rosencrantz and Guildenstern instead. Meanwhile, Ophelia has gone mad from the death of her dad and her rejection by Hamlet, and her brother Laertes, Polonius's other child, has returned from France furious. He and Claudius make a plan of their own. They'll challenge Hamlet to a fencing match, but Laertes will have a poisoned sword, and Claudius will offer Hamlet poisoned wine. So Hamlet comes home to Denmark, talks with a gravedigger, contemplates death, and finds out that Ophelia has drowned, apparently in a suicidal fit of madness. He has a fistfight with Laertes over who loved Ophelia more. And then the fencing match begins. Laertes cuts Hamlet with his poisoned sword, then they accidentally switch swords, and Hamlet cuts Laertes with the poisoned sword. Gertrude drinks the poisoned wine, seemingly unknowingly, and Hamlet finally kills Claudius. So almost everyone dies, leaving only Horatio to tell the tale to Fortinbras, a Norwegian prince who turns up at the end to take over the Danish throne. So that's Hamlet. There are lots of interesting questions to be asked about why the characters do what they do. Like, what's motivating Hamlet? What exactly is he so upset about, and why does it take him so long to do anything? Is Hamlet really pretending to be mad, or does he actually go a bit crazy? What about his relationship with Ophelia? Did Hamlet ever love her? And what's going on with Gertrude? How much does she know? There's lots of stuff going on in Hamlet about justice and identity and action and uncertainty and power and gender, and that's part of why Hamlet is so popular 400 years after it was written. It's also full of really cool lines, really poetic stuff and funny stuff. You can easily read it online if you want to check it out. Anyway, thanks for watching. Let me know if you'd like to see more summaries like this.
So that gives you a good understanding of the basic plot line of the play. And this play does raise very universal ideas about revenge, ambition, fate, gender, corruption, madness, power, the supernatural. And we will touch on these things. It's inevitable when you read this play. But it's also very much rooted in the ideas of its time. So it's very important to give a cultural context and a historical understanding of the time period and some of the themes and ideas that we're going to encounter as we read through the play. This play, like most of Shakespeare's works, was written during the Elizabethan period. And that was the time when Queen Elizabeth I was on the throne of England. And so Elizabeth was a very long ruling queen, and she governed with relative stability and prosperity for 44 years. And so this period of time was named for her. During her reign, she established or re-established Protestantism in England. She defeated the Spanish Armada, maintained peace inside what was previously a very divided country, and created an environment where the arts flourished. Thus, the reason that much of Shakespeare's work was produced during this time period. She was sometimes called the Virgin Queen as she never married. And she actually said, "I would rather be a beggar and single than a queen and married." Part of the reason for that is that she believed that marrying would endanger her authority and undermine her position as a monarch because she was a woman. So she did remain unmarried. Elizabeth herself has a very complicated family situation that led to real division in England. So just a little background on Elizabeth's family. Elizabeth's father was Henry VIII, and he is best known for having 6 wives, desperately wanting a son, and when a wife couldn't give him a male heir, disposing of them in some ways. So Henry was married first to a woman named Catherine, and Catherine was from Aragon, which is just in Spain. Catherine was originally married to Henry's brother, who was king at the time. When Henry's brother died, Henry ascended to the throne and took Catherine for his wife. Catherine, being from Spain, was a very devout Catholic, and England was under the authority of the Catholic Church and the Pope at the time. Well, Henry and Catherine were able to have a daughter named Mary, but they were not able to ever have a son. So Henry, very disturbed by this and desperate for a male heir, broke away from the Catholic Church in order to annul his marriage with Catherine. So Catherine was set aside, and Henry married a woman named Anne Boleyn. Anne Boleyn became the next queen. Anne was a Protestant and supported the breaking away of England from the Catholic Church. Anne and Henry had Elizabeth. When Elizabeth was 2 years old, her mother was executed because she could not give her father a son. And so went the lives of the women, the 4 other women that Henry married. So we have 2 little girls, 2 different moms raised in with very different religious upbringings. Mary was staunchly Catholic like her mother, and Elizabeth was a Protestant. Now, this matters for a contextual reason, that it's important to the time period and that it's important to the play. Mary became queen in 1553, and she ruled until 1558. She and Elizabeth had a very stormy relationship during that time period that Mary was queen. Since Mary was brought up as a Catholic, she enacted pro-Catholic legislation and made efforts to restore the Pope to supremacy in England. A Protestant rebellion ensued, and 2 specific things happened during that rebellion. Mary executed over 300 Protestants, calling them heretics. This earned her the nickname Bloody Mary, and she also imprisoned her sister Elizabeth in the Tower of London because she was a Protestant, and she was suspected for being complicit in the Protestant rebellion. After Mary's death, Elizabeth was able to survive several Catholic plots against her and ascended to the throne. And the people in charge, basically re-establishing Protestantism as the main form of, or the acceptable form of Christianity in the English Empire. Most people felt that she provided an environment of greater religious tolerance. So in any case, she established a permanent Protestant Church of England, and that has been the main church. The Protestant Church has been the main church of England since Elizabeth's reign. She, by her death in 1603, As I said before, she had raised England to major world prominence and united her country, created an environment where the arts flourished, and passed into history as one of England's greatest monarchs. So she is on the throne, and that's a little bit of the background of what was happening before this particular play was written. So let's turn now to a few things that we need to pay attention to that are going on in the play itself. So as you start reading through the play, I want you to keep these things in mind. People of the Elizabethan period, so this 1558 to 1603, believed in a actual spirit world that could exert an influence on their lives. And these spirits could be delightful and comforting, or they could be terrible and tormenting. So you had good spirits and you had bad spirits. And many theologians, scholars, and physicians also sought to make sense of extraordinary or inexplicable emotional states, trying to connect them to these spirits. Okay, so if you were melancholy, for example, sad, depressed, or over exuberant, was this a result of an interaction with the spirit world? So these were real life questions that scholars and theologians and physicians were working through. And I just wanted to give you a few examples of writers in the time period and some of the things that they were saying and thus were floating around in the culture that might be different from things that we believe today. So George Gifford wrote a discourse of the subtle practices of devils. And in this piece, he maintains that Lucifer, who is the archdevil, that Lucifer's fall from heaven led to a war between the angels and demons for the souls of the living. So that there is this cosmic supernatural struggle between angels and demons for people's mortal souls. And we actually see this idea in Hamlet toward the beginning of the play in Act 1 when he cries out, "Angels and ministers of grace, defend us." So clearly he is appealing to the angels for direct help and direct guidance against troubling evil spirits. Gifford also believed that a person with a melancholy temperament, such as Hamlet does have, is the perfect target for these devils, right? So that there is some supernatural explanation for his melancholy, or what we might think of as depressive anxiety disorder today. Joseph Hall, who was a staunch critic of the Catholic Church, wrote a piece called Meditations and Vows, and he thought that spirits of good and evil are everywhere, just like Gifford did, and that the evil ones provoke people to sin, stir up enemies, frighten and accuse, and that the good ones help deliver and comfort. And again, Hamlet too believes that spirits can take these different forms, so that they can take good forms or bad forms. Another writer named Ludwig Lavater, who was a Swiss Protestant theologian, wrote of ghosts and spirits walking by night. He believed and wrote that ghostly appearances could be emanations of a sick brain, or emissaries from purgatory returned to earth to seek help from the living to reduce terms of punishment. And we'll talk about the concept of purgatory in just a bit. But it's important to know that Hamlet's encounter with the ghost allows for both ideas, that the ghost, is the ghost an emanation from Hamlet's disturbed, grieving brain, or is the ghost actually his father returned from purgatory to seek help and reduce punishment, to be freed from purgatory? Talk about that in a minute. Then Robert Burton wrote The Anatomy of Melancholy, and this is what Hamlet is diagnosed with. And melancholy at this time designated a spiritual or mental state. And so now we think of mental health issues being just that, health issues, physical health issues. Then they believed that, okay, maybe it's a mental state, but there was definitely a spiritual element to it. So melancholy could refer to a slight and transient disability brought about by unusual circumstances. But if it persists, could become a disorder, marked by exaggerated and erratic moods in which fits of terror and grief alternate with outbursts of jesting or wit. So watch Hamlet, because clearly he is distraught and deeply grieving in Act 1. And so that would be a transient state brought about by the death of his father. But then does it become a disorder? And is Hamlet truly mad, or is he just pretending to be mad? So again, just things to pay attention to, but important to know these ideas that people held during the Elizabethan period, because they're very different from the ideas that we hold today about grief, about depression, about anxiety, and all of those things. So important to know. Now, let's turn and discuss purgatory a little bit, because as we deal with the ghost of Hamlet's father in Hamlet, that drives the plot of this play, it's important to understand what purgatory, the ideas around purgatory at this time. It was a Roman Catholic idea, and it's a place of purgation for the dead before entering heaven. So when a person dies, instead of going to heaven or to the good place of the afterlife, because remember, these folks were very steeped in Christian ideas, so it would have been heaven. Before entering heaven, this would be a place of purgation, where if there were any sins that needed to be atoned for, if there were any issues that needed to be addressed, that the person would spend this time in purgatory making those wrongs right, and then would be able to enter heaven. Purgatory was also a place where the dead could still commune with the living. Okay, so this is where the ghosts, the idea that the ghosts could be in this purgatory state, arise. Now remember, this is a very Roman Catholic idea, and the country is Protestant at the time, very Protestant at the time. So questions definitely arise in Hamlet about when the ghost says that he is confined to fast and fires till the foul crimes done in my days of nature are burnt and purged away. That is a specific nod to what purgatory is supposed to do according to Roman Catholic doctrine. However, his request to his son is not for prayers, which typically would have been the case, that as a family member you would pray or offer an indulgence, a payment to the church to help your loved one out of purgatory. What the ghost asked Hamlet for is revenge. Now, the Roman Catholic doctrine of purgatory would not have condoned this, nor would have English law or natural law. So this revenge element would not have fit in anywhere here in this culture. So perhaps this extraordinary request by the ghost explains some of Hamlet's hesitation. So even assuming that the ghost is honest, which that's mentioned at the beginning, Hamlet does risk damnation by committing murder. And he would believe this. So in light of Christian doctrine, then, the ghost is suspect from the beginning, and could be one of the reasons that Hamlet must develop proof in his mind that the ghost is telling the truth. So let's talk about women for a minute. There are two main female characters in this play, Ophelia and Gertrude, and we will talk about them. But first, it's important to talk about women on the Shakespearean stage, women who would have actually been actors in these performances. Well, there were none. During this time period, men would have played these roles of Gertrude and Ophelia. I know that's shocking, but it's true. And there were some specific reasons for this, culturally held beliefs that you guys need to know about. Medicine was one of them, and medical science of the time relied heavily on the work of Greek and Roman philosophers like Plato and Hippocrates and others to understand and treat the human body. This medical tradition held that female humans were essentially incomplete or unfinished males, a phenomenon caused by a lack of heat that would have otherwise resulted in the formation of male genitalia. Thus, women were understood as being weaker, more prone to psychological and physical ailment, and in need of supervision, control, and restraint by the one true sex, who were men. So women were too weak, too uncontrollable. It was unnatural then for them to actors or to perform in this way. Religion was another reason that women were not allowed to act on the Shakespearean stage. The Bible posited two distinct yet unequal sexes, Eve from Adam and Eve with the original temptation. So early modern English society enforced the idea that women were in need of domination and stewardship by men. So just as these ideas in medicine and religion would have prevented women from being on the Shakespearean stage, these issues also define the female characters in this play and limit them in very significant ways. Hamlet's view of women is decidedly dark. And in fact, he says about his mother, frailty, thy name is woman. Gertrude's marriage to Claudius has convinced Hamlet that women are untrustworthy, that their beauty is a cover for deceit and sexual desire. And so for Hamlet, women are living embodiments of appearances, corrupt effort to eclipse reality. Okay, so he has a very, very negative view about women based upon some of these cultural concepts at the time. As for women's social position in England and in the play, which is sort of ironic because there is a female English monarch, it was basically powerlessness. Gertrude's quick marriage to Claudius is also really her only way to maintain her status as queen. Now remember, Elizabeth's aunt, the mother of Mary, Catherine. Catherine was first married to Henry VIII's brother. So Catherine was queen of England because as she was married to brothers and to two different kings. And so this is the position that Gertrude finds herself in. So, yes, Claudius kills his brother. Henry VIII did not kill his brother, but the status of the queen was the same. And so in order for Gertrude to maintain her position, she really didn't have a choice. So she did marry Claudius. Now, Ophelia has even fewer options. So Ophelia is the daughter of Polonius, who is the Lord Chamberlain. And that was just a senior officer of the royal household. He was basically an advisor. Maybe if you think in American political terms, he would have been like the chief of staff for a president or a governor. So she had no royal bloodlines at all. She was just a member of the court because of her father, and her brother was friends with Hamlet. So understand that while Hamlet is waiting to seek revenge for his father's death, Ophelia can't act on her own. All she can do is, when she learns of her father's death, is wait for Laertes to return and do something about it. So her predicament is symbolic of women's position in general. They are completely dependent upon men. So just keep that in mind as you're exploring these characters. These women would not have had the opportunities and the power that women today, that we think of women today having. And then finally, I want to talk about revenge. Shakespeare's audience would have believed, like we do today, in the right to a fair trial. They would have believed that Claudius deserved to have a trial and not just be murdered by Hamlet. So this raises some interesting questions as it regards to, does Hamlet have the right or the moral authority to do what he does? And so these are just some issues that you need to be aware of, because they shed some light on the specific time period of the play. So I hope that you enjoy reading this play and working through this unit. Please do let me know if you have any questions.